She's called the Coffee Girl at Edwards Air Force Base. Could she hold a secret that changes everything? Nobody sees her. Nobody asks her name. They call her invisible, forgettable, disposable. But when a crisis strikes at 30,000 feet and 200 lives hang in the balance, they'll discover what she's been hiding all along. Sometimes the most extraordinary heroes are the ones we've been overlooking every single day. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing for more untold stories of remarkable people who changed everything in a single moment. Zevon Kaler moved through the officers' lounge like a ghost. Her soft-soled shoes made no sound against the polished floor. She refilled Colonel There's coffee cup without him even looking up from his tablet. Her presence was so unobtrusive that conversation continued uninterrupted around her. Her gray uniform was pressed to perfection, yet deliberately unmarked by any insignia or identifier beyond the simple staff badge pinned above her left breast pocket. VIP transport inbound people, Colonel Thackeray announced, his voice carrying across the room with practiced authority. ETA 90 minutes, we've got 3 foreign dignitaries, 6 senior officers, and their families returning from the Pacific Summit. I want every protocol followed to the letter. The officers scrambled into action. Flight plans spread across tables. Weather reports called up on screens. Zevon continued her rounds, invisible among the flurry of activity, watching as the base meteorologist frowned at his radar display. Sir, there's a significant storm system developing along the transport's flight path, the meteorologist said, pointing to a cluster of angry red and yellow pixels blooming across the screen. Looks like they're flying into some rough weather. Zevon paused, coffee pot suspended midair as her eyes flickered to the radar. She took in the atmospheric pressure readings, the wind vectors, the rapidly forming cell that hadn't been there during the morning briefing. Her lips parted slightly as if to speak, but then she pressed them together again. Lieutenant Farrow noticed her hesitation and scowled. Hey, Coffee Girl, why don't you stick to what you know? Nobody asked for your opinion on atmospheric conditions. Several officers chuckled. Zevon nodded once, her face a careful blank, and resumed pouring, but her eyes lingered on the radar, tracking the intersection of the transport's planned route and the intensifying storm. As she moved away, the officer nearest the screen knocked his arm against his cup, sending coffee spilling across the printed flight plans. Damn it, he muttered, grabbing for napkins. Zevon was there before he finished speaking, efficiently blotting the spill with practiced motions. As she gathered the sodden papers, she spoke so quietly that only those nearest could hear. The western approach would keep them clear of the worst cells. The jet stream shifted north overnight. No one acknowledged her words. She collected the empty cups and headed back to the break room, leaving behind officers who had already forgotten her presence. In the small staff locker area, Zevon stored the cleaning supplies and checked her watch. She opened her locker to retrieve a fresh towel, revealing a small worn photograph partially tucked into the inside pocket of her jacket. The image showed a younger Zevon standing beside an aircraft, wearing what appeared to be a flight suit. Her posture in the photo was different somehow, her stance wider, shoulders squared. A confident smile that the present-day Zevon never wore. Will this hidden past save them all? Before she could retrieve the photo, the door swung open. She closed the locker quickly as Base Commander Alquist entered. Kaler, he acknowledged with a distracted nod. The only person on base who consistently used her name rather than Coffee Girl or simply nothing at all. Commander, she responded, her voice slightly clearer than the whisper she used in the officer's presence. He glanced at her, then away, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. Weather's turning worse than expected. Transport's reporting some electrical anomalies, but they're proceeding as planned. Zevon's expression shifted minutely, concern flashing behind her carefully maintained neutrality. She nodded once more and slipped past him, returning to her duties as the commander collected what he'd come for and left. The morning proceeded with routine efficiency. Zevon moved between the officers' lounge, the command center, and various meeting rooms. An unremarkable presence ensured coffee was fresh, spills were managed, and supplies replenished. No one noticed how her attention repeatedly returned to the weather monitors or how she paused whenever the transport status was mentioned in passing conversation. At precisely 11:30 hours, everything changed. The alarm klaxons blared without warning, their harsh sound cutting through the mundane background noise of the base. In the command center, officers rushed to stations as screens flashed with urgent data. Zibin entered with a fresh pot of coffee, instantly forgotten as the crisis unfolded. Transport Bravo Echo 7 reporting multiple system failures, called out a communications officer, her voice tight with professional restraint. They're requesting emergency assistance and diversion clearance. Commander Alquist strode into the center, immediately taking control. Status report. Sir, they encountered severe turbulence inside that storm cell. Reporting electrical system malfunctions and unexpected altitude drops. They're attempting to stabilize, but the officer paused, pressing her headset closer to her ear. Their primary navigation is offline. Sven sat down the coffee pot and stepped back against the wall, watching the screens with an intensity that would have seemed out of place if anyone had noticed. The transport's flight path was now erratic, altitude numbers fluctuating in digital red. Transport's losing altitude, the communications officer announced, voice rising slightly, reporting cabin pressure issues. And wait, the pilot and co-pilot are showing signs of hypoxia. What about the backup flight crew? Alquist demanded. Sir, the backup crew is reporting the same symptoms. Something's affecting the entire flight deck. The command center erupted in controlled chaos. The transport was beginning a dangerous descent. Automated systems failing one after another. The backup pilots were showing the same symptoms as the primary crew. All of them increasingly incapacitated from an unknown cause. Get me a direct line to anyone on that flight deck who can still respond, Commander Alquist ordered. And find me someone who knows the emergency protocols for manual override on that specific transport model. Officers scrambled to comply, but confusion spread across faces. This particular transport was a newer model with systems that had been significantly upgraded since standard training. The specialist who would normally advise in such situations was off base at a conference in Nevada. Zevin stood in the background, silently absorbing the technical details as they flashed across screens. She moved slightly to her right, positioning herself where she could see a secondary monitor displaying the aircraft's flight data. A lieutenant rushing past bumped into her, causing coffee to spill down her uniform. Get out of the way, he snapped. What are you even doing here? She stepped back, eyes never leaving the screen. Those who might have been watching would have noticed something subtle in her demeanor. Her posture straightened almost imperceptibly, her breathing slowed, and her eyes tracked the flight calculations with expert precision. When the attention in the room focused on Commander Alquist, conferring urgently with his senior officers, Zevin slipped a hand into her pocket and withdrew a keycard. The high-level security clearance it displayed should never have belonged to someone known merely as the coffee girl. Oxygen masks deployed in the cabin, reported the communications officer. But flight deck reporting increased symptoms of hypoxia. Primary pilot has lost consciousness. Backup pilot attempting to stabilize but showing similar symptoms. Altitude demanded, dropping steadily, 28,000 feet and descending. Do we have any contact with conscious crew members? Backup co-pilot still responsive but disoriented. Cabin senior staff attempting to access the flight deck, but having difficulty with the security protocols. Commander Alquist ran a hand through his gray hair. The gravity of the situation etched in the lines of his face. 200 lives were at stake and options were diminishing with each passing second. We need someone on that calm system who can talk them through an emergency landing procedure, he said firmly. Someone who knows that transport inside and out. The room fell silent. Nobody present had the specialized knowledge for this particular aircraft's manual override procedures. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the continuing alarms and the steady, terrifying descent numbers on the altitude display. Sir, began Colonel Thackeray. Maybe if we patch in Nevada, get that specialist on video conference, they could walk us through. There's no time. Alquist cut him off, eyes fixed on the rapidly changing data. At their current descent rate, we have less than 15 minutes before they are in critical territory. We need someone now. Zevin stepped forward, her voice suddenly clear and authoritative. cutting through the tension like a knife. I can guide them in. The room turned to her in collective shock and disbelief. For a moment, it seemed no one could process that the perpetually silent woman who refilled their coffee cups had spoken at all, let alone with such confident assertion. Lieutenant Farrow recovered first, his face contorting with incredulous anger. Are you insane? Get back to the coffee station. Zion ignored him completely, approaching Commander Alquist directly. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. She spoke quietly, for his ears alone, but her voice carried a weight and authority that transformed her entirely. Authorization code Tango Victor 947 Sierra, she said. I flew the prototype for this aircraft. Commander Alquist's face transformed from confusion to shock as he recognized the classified code. He stared at Given for one more second before turning to his communications officer. Give her access, he ordered. Now, sir. Colonel Thackeray stepped forward, baffled. You cannot be serious. She's the coffee girl. That's an order, Colonel. Alquist said, voice hard as steel. Give Captain Kaler full access to communications and all flight systems data. The word captain sent a ripple of stunned disbelief through the command center. Sven moved toward the communication station with newfound purpose. Each step revealed a different person than the one who had poured their coffee minutes before. Her shoulders squared, chin lifted, movements precise and economical. The transformation was so complete that several officers found themselves unconsciously standing straighter in her presence. Transport Bravo Echo 7, this is Captain Zan Kaler, she said into the comm system, her voice clear and commanding. I'm going to bring you home. The background noise in the command center faded as everyone watched in stunned silence. The coffee girl had vanished, replaced by someone they had never truly seen before, someone who radiated competence and authority as she began issuing precise technical instructions to the struggling transport crew. Report status of manual override systems, she continued, fingers flying across the keyboard to bring up detailed schematics. Bypass circuit breaker panel delta and reroute through the secondary navigation array. As Zion worked, her focus absolute, the officers exchanged bewildered glances. Commander Alquist stood watching, his expression unreadable, as the woman they had all overlooked for years revealed herself to be something entirely different than what they had assumed. No one dared interrupt as she guided the transport through its crisis, fighting to save 200 souls in the sky above them with nothing but her voice, her knowledge, and the skills that had remained hidden for so long behind a carefully constructed mask of invisibility. The voice that responded through the crackling communication system was strained and breathless. Captain Kaler, this is Senior Flight Attendant Mercer. Both pilots are unconscious. Backup co-pilot Holloway is responsive but severely disoriented. I am in the cockpit with First Officer Holloway now. Zevon nodded as if the flight attendant could see her. Understood, Mercer. Put me on speaker so they can hear. Then I need you to check the oxygen supply system for the flight deck. There should be a panel to your left with pressure readings. As Mercer followed instructions, Zevon pulled up the complete schematics of the transport on her screen. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, anticipating the aircraft's systems before anyone else in the room could process what was happening. Oxygen system shows warning indicators. Mercer reported pressure is well below normal levels. Secondary contamination, Zahn muttered, then spoke clearly into the calm Holloway. I need you to switch to the emergency oxygen tank under the right console. The primary system has been compromised. In the command center, Colonel Thacker stepped closer to Commander Alquist, speaking in a harsh whisper. What is happening here? Who is she really? Quist kept his eyes on Zahn. That's classified, Colonel. But right now, she's their only chance. On the screens above them, the transport's flight path continued its alarming descent. Zevon glanced up at the altitude reading. 22,000 feet and still dropping. Holloway, report your status, she called. A new voice came through. Male and disoriented, but fighting for clarity. Captain Kaler, this is First Officer Holloway. Head clearing slightly with emergency oxygen. Manual control sluggish. Multiple system failures. We've lost primary navigation. Hydraulics are compromised and the storm is tossing us like a toy. Listen carefully, Holloway. I need you to disengage the autopilot completely and switch to manual override Alpha 3. Alpha 3? That's not in standard protocol, Holloway responded, confusion evident in his voice. This aircraft has a tertiary control system that bypasses the main computer if both primary and secondary systems are compromised. Zivin explained, her tone leaving no room for argument. Panel behind the co-pilot's right knee. Access code 7729 Echo Foxtrot. The command center had fallen into shocked silence. Lieutenant Farrow stared at Zivin with his mouth slightly open, unable to reconcile the coffee girl with the aviation expert now commandeering their emergency response. How does she know that system exists? Colonel Tho whispered. That's classified beyond even my clearance. Commander Alquist remained silent, his eyes never leaving Zevin as she worked. In his expression, there was something beyond surprise, something that might have been regret. I've accessed Alpha 3, Holloway reported, his voice stronger now. Getting limited response from the controls. Good, Zahn replied. Now listen carefully. You need to level out before you lose more altitude. Your left engine is showing signs of strain, so compensate with 15% more power to the right. The manual trim will feel stiff, but it's designed that way to prevent overcorrection during emergency situations. As Holloway acknowledged and followed her instructions, the screen showed the transport's descent rate beginning to slow. It wasn't stabilized yet, but the free fall had been halted. How is she doing this? Someone whispered behind Alquist. For the first time, the commander turned slightly. Because Captain Zan Kaler was the lead test pilot for the experimental squadron that developed this aircraft, he said quietly. She knows it better than anyone alive. The revelation rippled through the room like an electric current. Officers who had barely acknowledged Zivin's existence for years now stared at her with new eyes, seeing glimpses of who she truly was as she worked with focused intensity. On the main screen, a memory flashed unbidden across Zivin's mind, superimposing itself over the present crisis. She was in a flight suit, helmet under her arm, standing before a gleaming prototype aircraft. A team of engineers and fellow pilots surrounded her, faces bright with anticipation and respect. She was their leader, their most skilled pilot, the one they trusted to push the experimental craft to its limits and bring it back safely. The memory vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Zevin refocused on the present crisis, her face revealing nothing of the momentary distraction. Holloway, I need you to prepare for an emergency descent pattern, she instructed. The storm cell is intensifying to your east. We need to get you below it and approach from the southwest corridor. Captain, our navigation systems are still offline. I have no reliable instruments to guide that approach. I'll be your instrument, Sven replied without hesitation. Follow my instructions exactly. Mercer, I need you to secure the cabin and prepare passengers for potential rough maneuvers. As the transport began its controlled descent under Zevin's guidance, another memory surfaced, darker than the first. A classified mission, a split-second decision with catastrophic consequences. A debriefing room filled with stern faces telling her that while she had saved her team, the collateral damage was politically untenable. They offered her a choice that was no choice at all. Dishonorable discharge that would destroy everything she had worked for, or complete anonymity in a support role, disappear or be destroyed. In the present, Sven's hands remained steady on the controls, her voice calm and authoritative as she guided the damaged transport through complex maneuvers. The base personnel watched in stunned silence as the coffee girl performed flight calculations in her head that would challenge their best pilots. Your primary hydraulic system is failing, she advised Holloway. Switch to backup now, but be prepared for heavy control resistance. Switching now, Holloway confirmed. Captain, the storm turbulence is making it nearly impossible to maintain heading. The crosswinds at your current altitude are approximately 45 knots from the southeast, Zivin responded without consulting any instruments. Use the rudder to compensate, but be gentle. That system wasn't designed for prolonged stress under these conditions. Colonel leaned toward Commander Alquist. How can she possibly know the exact wind conditions without current meteorological data? Because, Alquist replied quietly, she can read the aircraft's behavior like most people read a book. She's not guessing. She's interpreting what the plane is telling her through today's reports. The transport continued its controlled descent, now passing through 15,000 feet. The screen showed it had successfully navigated around the worst of the storm cell, but danger was far from over. Multiple systems remained offline, and the craft was still fighting for stability. We're getting warning lights across the board, Holloway reported, tension evident in his voice despite his professional calm. Fuel pressure dropping in the left tank. Sabine nodded to herself as if she had been expecting this. Crossfeed valve should be located on panel C, lower right quadrant. Activate it to balance the fuel load, then reduce power to 70% on both engines. That will increase our descent rate, Holloway objected. Trust me, Zivan responded firmly. Your current fuel consumption is unsustainable for the approach I'm planning. We need to conserve what's left while maintaining controlled descent. Throughout the command center, officers who had spent years dismissing or ignoring Zion now watched with a mixture of awe and growing respect. The transformation was complete. No trace remained of the quiet woman who had poured their coffee. In her place stood a commanding officer whose expertise was undeniable. Approaching 10,000 feet, Holloway reported. Visibility is poor due to cloud cover and rain. Still no functioning navigation instruments. You're going to feel a significant wind shear as you break through the cloud layer. Zahn advised, don't fight it. Use it to your advantage. Let it push you slightly southwest, then correct once you're clear. As she spoke, her fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up the base's landing approach patterns and runway conditions. She studied them briefly, making rapid calculations. Runway 29er is your best option, she informed Holloway. Crosswind will be minimal, and it's the longest runway available. You'll need the extra length with your compromised braking systems. How did you know our braking systems are compromised? Holloway asked, surprise evident in his voice. We just got that warning light. The hydraulic failure pattern you described affects the braking system on this model, Zivan explained without breaking stride. It's a design flaw that was supposed to be corrected after the prototype phase. In the command center, several senior officers exchanged meaningful glances. That information was not widely known outside the classified development program. Now reduce speed to 140 knots and prepare for final approach, Zivan instructed. You'll feel the crosswind trying to push you off course. Don't fight it, use it. Tension mounted in the command center as the transport approached the critical phase of its emergency landing. Officers who had begun the day with routine tasks now held their breath, watching the altitude numbers decrease steadily as Zivan guided the damaged aircraft through its descent with calm precision. Visual contact with the ground, Holloway reported, relief evident in his voice. I can see the runway lights through the rain. Good, Zivan responded. You're lined up well. Maintain current heading. Deploy landing gear now. There was a moment of tense silence before Holloway's voice returned. Landing gear showing only partial deployment. Nose gear and right main gear indicate locked position. Left main gear shows uncertain status. This new complication sent another ripple of concern through the command center. An uncertain landing gear status significantly increased the danger of the approaching landing attempt. Zivan, however, showed no sign of alarm. Understood. Recycle the landing gear system once, then we'll proceed regardless of indicator status. The left gear may be deployed, but with a sensor malfunction. And if it isn't asked, the professional calm in his voice is strained by the implications. Then we'll deal with that when we have 200 people safely on the ground, Zivan replied with absolute conviction. Focus on maintaining your glide path, 5,000 feet now. The transport emerged from the clouds, damaged, but under control. On the external cameras that had been hastily directed toward the approaching aircraft, they could see it fighting the crosswinds, but maintaining a remarkably stable descent path given its compromised systems. 3,000 feet, Zivan called out, her voice still unwavering. Begin your final approach checklist. Captain Holloway replied. With our systems in this state, the standard checklist isn't applicable. Correct, she acknowledged. Focus only on items 3, 7, and 12. Disregard the rest. Cabin pressure should be your priority now. As the transport descended through 2,000 feet, the command center erupted in fresh activity. Emergency crews were dispatched to the runway. Foam trucks positioned strategically along the approach path in case the uncertain landing gear status resulted in a belly landing. 1,000 feet, Zivan called. You're doing well, Holloway. Adjust trim 2 degrees nose up to compensate for the headwind. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as the damaged transport made its final approach. Through the external cameras, they could see it fighting against the storm winds, but holding steady on its course toward runway 29er. The rain had intensified, reducing visibility, but the aircraft's landing lights cut through the downpour. 500 feet, Zevon announced. You're perfectly aligned, beginning the countdown to touchdown. Maintain current glide path. She continued to call out altitudes, her voice a steady anchor for the struggling pilots. 300 feet, 200, 100, 50. The transport's wheels touched down with a spray of water from the rain-soaked runway. For one heart-stopping moment, it seemed to list slightly to the left. The uncertain landing gear status suddenly became a critical concern. But then it stabilized, slowing steadily as it consumed the runway length. Full reverse thrust, Zevon commanded. You'll have reduced braking efficiency. Use every foot of runway available. The transport continued its deceleration, finally coming to a complete stop with less than 500 feet of runway remaining. In the command center, the tension broke with a collective exhale of relief. Several officers spontaneously applauded, the sound quickly spreading until the entire room was filled with the celebration of 200 lives saved. Amidst it all, Zevon stood motionless at the communications console, her expression carefully neutral as she completed her final instructions to the flight crew. Shut down engines. Deploy emergency evacuation slides as a precaution, but standard deplaning should be possible via airstairs. Medical teams are en route for the flight crew and any passengers requiring assistance. Only when Holloway acknowledged these final instructions did Zine step back from the console. As she did, the transformation seemed to reverse itself. Her shoulders lowered slightly. Her posture became less commanding. Her expression returned to the careful blank that had been her mask for years. But it was too late. Everyone in the command center had seen who she truly was. The coffee girl had vanished forever, replaced by the reality of Captain Sven Kaler, elite pilot and reluctant hero. As emergency crews secured the transport, the command center remained in a state of stunned silence. The celebration that had erupted at the successful landing had faded, replaced by a collective bewilderment as officers tried to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the one who had just saved 200 lives. Zevon stood perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the monitors, showing the transport safely on the runway. Her expression revealed nothing of her thoughts as passengers began to disembark, assisted by ground crews and medical personnel rushing to attend to the still unconscious pilots. Commander Alquist approached her, his weathered face unreadable. "Captain Kaler," he said, the formal address hanging in the air between them, acknowledgement of a rank the rest of the base had never known she held. Sven turned to face him, meeting his gaze directly for perhaps the first time in years. "Commander," she replied, her voice once again quiet, but no longer the near whisper she had used that morning. "My office," he said simply. 10 minutes. She nodded once and turned away, moving toward the door with that same efficiency of movement, though now it seemed different to those watching. What had once appeared as the careful motions of someone trying to avoid notice now revealed themselves as the precise economy of a highly trained officer. As she left the command center, the silence broke. Questions erupted from all sides. Officers turned to Commander Alquist with expressions ranging from confusion to indignation. "What just happened?" Colonel the demanded. "Who is she? How long have you known?" Alquist raised a hand, silencing the barrage. "Secure the transport and passengers first. Debrief in 1 hour." Without further explanation, he followed Zevon from the room, leaving a wake of speculation behind him. In the corridors, personnel stopped and stared as Zevon passed. Word had spread through the base with lightning speed. The impossible story of the coffee girl who had taken command during a crisis and revealed herself as a decorated pilot. Some nodded respectfully, others simply watched in stunned silence, mentally rewriting years of interaction with a woman they had barely acknowledged. In his office, Commander Alquist sat behind his desk as Zeben entered and closed the door behind her. For a long moment, neither spoke. It was Alquist who finally broke the silence. 3 years, he said quietly. 3 years you've been pouring coffee and emptying trash cans. Never said a word. Zeben remained standing, her posture now unmistakably military. Those were the terms. The terms were that you accept a support position and maintain low visibility. Alquist countered. Not that you become a ghost. It was easier, she replied simply. Alquist studied her face, searching for something in her carefully composed expression. You could have come to me. I would have found something more suitable. Flight simulator instruction, maintenance oversight, anything but this. With respect, sir, those positions would have been too visible. Too many questions. And now, he asked, after what just happened there, the questions are inevitable. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed Sven's face, so brief it might have been imagined. I made a judgment call. The lives on that transport outweighed the terms of my agreement. Alquist nodded slowly. A judgment call like the one you made 3 years ago. Zahn did not respond, but her silence was enough. The commander sighed and opened a drawer in his desk, withdrawing a file marked with the highest security classification. Captain Zeben Kaler, he read aloud. Former commanding officer of the 87th Experimental Test Squadron, lead test pilot for the 1529 Hyperion project, Distinguished Flying Cross, Silver Star. He looked up from the file. And now the woman who refills my coffee cup. Former captain, Zeben corrected quietly. No. Alquist shook his head. Your commission was never formally revoked. The paperwork was prepared but never processed. Technically, you've been on extended administrative leave, an arrangement that allowed certain political entities to save face while burying a potential scandal. Zane's carefully maintained composure slipped, genuine surprise showing in her eyes. I was told my choice was dishonorable discharge or complete anonymity in a support role. You were lied to, Alquist said bluntly. By people who found it easier to hide you away than to defend your actions, despite the fact that every official investigation cleared you of wrongdoing. Outside the office, the base continued its emergency response. Personnel moving with purpose as they attended to the rescued passengers and crew. Through the window, Zeben could see the transport on the runway, surrounded by emergency vehicles, a tangible reminder of what her intervention had achieved. Why are you telling me this now? She asked, turning back to face the commander. Because you just saved 200 lives using skills that the Air Force spent millions to develop in you. Because those passengers include 3 foreign dignitaries and the families of senior officers. Because hiding you away was never my decision. And what happened today proves it was the wrong one. A knock at the door interrupted them. Colonel entered without waiting for a response, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and confusion. Records are being pulled, Commander, he reported stiffly. The classified files on Captain Kaler are being transmitted from Pentagon archives as we speak. Thank you, Colonel Alquist replied evenly. That's gaze shifted to Zahn, seeing her truly for perhaps the first time. I owe you an apology, Captain, he said, the words clearly difficult for him. We all do. Zeben said nothing, her expression revealing neither acceptance nor rejection of the apology. The transport passengers are asking about the pilot who talked them down, then continued. They want to express their gratitude. That won't be necessary, Zeben replied automatically. I disagreed, and a new voice came from the doorway. All 3 turned to see a distinguished older man in the uniform of an Air Force general, his chest heavy with decorations. Behind him stood Lieutenant Farrow, looking distinctly uncomfortable. General Blackwood, Commander Alquist acknowledged, rising quickly to attention. Zeben and Thacker followed suit. At ease, the general said, stepping into the office, his gaze fixed on Zeben, recognition and something like regret in his eyes. Captain Kaler, it's been a long time. Yes, sir, Zevon replied neutrally. General Blackwood turned briefly to Alquist. Commander, I'd like to speak with Captain Kaler alone. Of course, sir. Alquist nodded to and both men left the office, closing the door behind them. Alone with the general, Zevon maintained her perfect posture, her face revealing nothing of her thoughts. 3 years ago, Blackwood began without a preamble. You made a call that saved your entire squadron, but resulted in collateral damage that became a political nightmare. Yes, sir. I was part of the committee that decided your fate, the general continued. We took the easy way out, the politically expedient solution. He paused, meeting her gaze directly. I have regretted it ever since. Zevon remained silent, waiting. Today, you saved my life, Blackwood said simply. My wife's life, my granddaughter's life, along with nearly 200 others. You did it without hesitation, despite what we did to you. I did my duty, sir. Your duty, Blackwood repeated softly. After we stripped you of your command, your identity, your very existence, you still consider it your duty. For the first time, Zevon's composure wavered slightly. The oath I took didn't have an expiration date, sir. Not for me. The general studied her for a long moment, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. This belongs to you, Captain. It always has. He opened the box to reveal the silver wings of an Air Force pilot. Zevon stared at them, her expression finally betraying emotion, a complex mixture of longing and uncertainty. Sir, I'm not sure. Take them, Blackwood said, his tone gentle but firm. Whatever happens next is your choice, but these were earned. They can never be taken away. Slowly, Zion reached out and accepted the box, closing her fingers around it carefully as if it might disappear. General Blackwood straightened, his demeanor shifting to one of formal respect. He raised his hand in a precise salute. Thank you, Captain Kaler, for your service then, and your service today. Zahn returned the salute with perfect form, muscle memory overriding years of practiced invisibility. As the general turned to leave, he paused at the door. The passengers are gathered in the main briefing room. They've been told who saved them. They're waiting to express their gratitude. With that, he was gone, leaving Zevon alone with the weight of a past she had buried and a future suddenly uncertain. For several minutes, she stood motionless, the small box still clutched in her hand. Then, with deliberate movements, she placed it carefully in her pocket and left the office. The corridors seemed different now, the familiar spaces transformed by the shift in her status. Personnel moved aside as she passed, some nodding respectfully, others simply watching with newfound awareness. Zevon walked with purpose, her destination clear. The main briefing room doors were closed when she arrived. She hesitated for only a moment before pushing them open and stepping inside. The room fell silent immediately. Nearly 200 faces turned toward her, expressions of curiosity giving way to recognition and gratitude. At the front of the room stood First Officer Holloway, his face still pale from his ordeal, but his posture straight as he addressed the assembled passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence, Captain Zevon Kaler. For a moment, Zevon froze, unaccustomed to being the center of attention after years of cultivated invisibility. Then from the back of the room, a single figure rose and began to applaud. General Blackwood, standing tall despite his advanced age, his hands coming together in a steady rhythm of respect. One by one, others joined him. Senior officers who had never given her a second glance now stood at attention. Foreign dignitaries nodded in formal acknowledgement. Families with children who would never have seen another day without her intervention applauded with tears in their eyes. The sound built until it filled the room, a wave of gratitude and recognition washing over Zevon as she stood perfectly still, unsure how to respond to what she had denied herself for so long. Then, from the side of the room, Lieutenant Farrow stepped forward, the same officer who had dismissively called her coffee girl that morning, now approached with an expression of genuine remorse. Without a word, he raised his hand in a formal salute, holding it with perfect precision. One by one, every military officer in the room followed suit until Zevon faced a sea of salutes, a silent acknowledgement of her rank, her skill, and her sacrifice. Only then did her carefully maintained composure finally break. She returned the salute, her eyes bright with emotion she had suppressed for 3 long years. 1 week later, Zivin entered the officers' lounge, no longer in the plain gray uniform of support staff, but not quite in full officer dress either. She wore a transitional uniform, the insignia of her rank present, but subdued, a visual representation of her in-between status. The room fell silent as she entered, conversations pausing as officers acknowledged her presence with nods of respect. So different from the invisibility of before, but not yet comfortable. Not for any of them. Commander Alquist approached, a folder in his hands. "Captain Kaler," he greeted her formally. "Commander," she replied with a slight nod. He extended the folder to her, "Your official reinstatement papers. The Air Force never officially acknowledged what happened 3 years ago, and they never will. But they're offering you a choice now. Your wings back," or he hesitated. "You can walk away with full honors and benefits. Your choice." Zevin accepted the folder but did not open it immediately. Instead, she looked past Alquist to the window where the transport she had saved sat on the tarmac undergoing repairs before returning to service. The Air Force never officially acknowledged what happened. She repeated softly. The lives lost. The judgment call that no one was willing to defend publicly. Even as they cleared me in private. No, Alquist acknowledged. They never did. Politics and courage rarely occupy the same space. Captain Zevin finally opened the folder, scanning the contents with the same efficiency she brought to everything. And now they need me again. The Air Force always needed you. Alquist corrected. They just forgot that for a while. She closed the folder, her decision already made. I never stopped being a pilot, she said quietly. Even when I was pouring your coffee. Alquist smiled slightly, understanding the acceptance in her words. No, he agreed. You never did. The next morning, Zevin stood on the flight line, dressed in a proper flight suit for the first time in 3 years. The familiar weight of it felt strange after so long, but right, like returning to a home she had never truly left. As she approached the aircraft assigned for her certification flight, she noticed Lieutenant Farrow waiting at the bottom of the boarding ladder. He held a steaming cup in his hands, and as she reached him, he extended it toward her with a nod of respect. Your coffee, Captain, he said simply. Zevin accepted the cup, the gesture saying more than any formal apology could have. She took a sip, then handed it back with the ghost of a smile. Thank you, Lieutenant, but I prefer to fly on a clear head. With that, she ascended the ladder and took her rightful place in the cockpit, ready to reclaim the sky that had always been hers. In the officers' lounge, the story of Captain Zan Kaler continued to spread, growing with each telling, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones we fail to see. Hidden in plain sight until the moment when their true nature can no longer be denied. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition, but deserved more than anyone else? Someone whose quiet competence made all the difference when it mattered most? Share your story in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the most extraordinary people are hiding in plain sight. For more stories of unsung heroes, subscribe now.